You ever came across a guy named Eric Von Zip?
Sure.
And what can you tell me about him? And was he a gangster? Would you consider him a gangster?
Yeah. So Eric Von Zip was known to me as somebody who was at one time worked with Melvin Combs, who was Puffy's father. He was a drug dealer in Harlem. He was known as being the king of PCP in New York. And if you wanted
Zip or Melvin, I'm sorry.
Zip.
Okay.
So Eric Von Zip was known as the PCP king. If you wanted liquid PCP, he had it, and he'd sell you it in like huge, allotments. Back then, guys were dipping, weed, a joint into PCP, smoking it, and doing really crazy stuff. I guess it's like kind of like a meth speed kind of thing, but it also has, the ability to make people violent. I did a case out in Staten Island. We got asked to do a favor, and we started buying liquid PCP with a guy whose supplier was, what's his name?
Where's he from?
No, we were just talking about him. We were buying PCP in Staten Island from a guy who's getting his supply from Eric Von Zip. Okay. So it just was one of these things, like we bought like a gallon of it, and I put it in my car to drive back to the DEA with it to put it into evidence. And by the time I got there, I was high as, all hell. And we were like, you know what, let's just take this case down. So the feds didn't want it. And Staten Island DA's office took it, and the guy got he got like 3 months. He didn't want to cooperate. There was no jail time. It didn't really matter. So we couldn't buy up. And we didn't want to get involved with it because the guy was real dangerous. He thought everybody was the cops. He'd be, running around his house, looking out the window. He had guns. It was just one of those things like, right. Why get killed over some nonsense PCP shit? So, and then years later, of course, Von Zip comes on our radar as being somebody who's involved in protecting Puffy, or, being part of his entourage at times, traveling with him. And so he was back on the radar and back of interest to me. But he had ended up buying a club in New York.
Zip code. It
used to be Jimmy's Uptown. And I think Jimmy got arrested for money laundering, if I remember correctly. And he got the business out of Steele. So he opens up the club. He calls it Zip Code, and he ends up getting cancer a short time later and ends up dying. He was living out in Jersey somewhere, and that's the last I ever heard of him. So.
Do you remember when he bought that club? It's like what year?
I want to say he bought it in like the late '90s, maybe, or 2000-ish.
Right. Now, what year did he come on your radar? Do you remember?
Probably in the late 90s, about 98, 98, something like that, 99.
Yeah, Zip is a very interesting guy that obviously not a lot of people talk about because everybody probably is passed on. Or...
Yeah, the real good guys out there who are good at their trade, good at their craft, you don't hear a lot about them because they don't talk, they don't brag. They don't show off. The only thing that was kind of silly with him is he used to collect cars, and I went to his house out in New Jersey. And he had like 30 cars in his backyard. He had a stretch limo. He had like all this crazy stuff. Like, if I'm your neighbor, I'm gonna want to know where you get all the money for all these cars. And of course, though, that after a while he just let them kind of get old out there. But
right.
Yeah, he was a big car guy and. But you don't hear much about him,
So he was, from what your knowledge, he was on, obviously, PCP.
He was a PCP guy. He sold, he had that market. It's not a popular drug in New York, but it's real popular down in Philly and different places.
What about the West Coast?
There are guys out in the West Coast who do it too. Mm-hmm. I think that cat Keefy D was selling it out.
Right. I wanted to get into that. What do you think of Zip's connection to Keefy D and obviously his connection to the Tupac murder?
I have a lot of problems with that case. It's a crazy case. It seems that every